The planet Uranus has 28 known moons, including the 5 major moons Ariel, Umbriel, Miranda, Oberon, and Titania. The moons of Uranus are sometimes called the literary moons. This is because they're mostly named after characters from William Shakespeare's works, although a few also take their names from the works of Alexander Pope. All of the larger Uranian moons are thought to consist of roughly equal amounts of water ice and silicate rock. The composition of the smaller outer moons are mostly unknown. The 5 largest moons are very dark, as they reflect no more than about a third of the sunlight that reaches them. This suggests their surfaces have been darkened by some kind of carbonaceous material. These 5 moons are also all tidally locked and only show one face to Uranus. The Uranian moons share their host planet's 98-degree axial tilt, and they orbit across its tilted equator, which is almost perpendicular to its orbit around the sun. This indicates that the moons formed after the massive collision that could have knocked Uranus sideways. In 2017, some astronomers even suggested that it was this very collision that created at least some of the moons themselves. The first 2 moons were discovered in 1787, with 2 more following in 1851. Nearly a century later, a 5th moon was discovered in 1948. In 1986, the Voyager 2 spacecraft uncovered 10 more moons during its flyby of Uranus. An 11th moon went unnoticed in the images initially until finally being noticed in 1999 and then confirmed in 2003. In that same year, 2 more moons were discovered. All 18 of the moons I've just mentioned are regular. This means they have prograde, low inclination, and low eccentricity orbits. They orbit in the same direction as Uranus's rotation. Their orbits aren't tilted much relative to the planet's equator, and the shapes of their orbits don't deviate very far from a circle. Since 1997, 9 small outer moons have been discovered. These are all irregular satellites, and all except one orbit in a retrograde direction, opposite of Uranus's rotation. These were likely captured around Uranus after the planet formed. All of these discoveries have been left to the Hubble Space Telescope and ground-based telescopes because no spacecraft has visited Uranus since Voyager 2. The most recently discovered moon was first spotted in November of 2023 and announced just earlier this year. It currently only has a designation, but it will eventually be named for a literary character just like the other moons. Let's get into more of the details about the fascinating moons of Uranus. Titania and Oberon were discovered on January 11th, 1787 by William Herschel. They're the largest moons of Uranus. Titania has a diameter of about 1,000 miles, while Oberon is around 946 miles across. They're named for the Queen and King of the Fairies in Shakespeare's play A Midsummer Night's Dream. Titania orbits an average of around 271,000 miles from Uranus. It rotates and orbits Uranus once every 8.7 days. Images from Voyager 2 revealed that the moon was, at some point, geologically active. It features a prominent system of fault valleys, some almost 1,000 miles long, that are visible near the shadow line. These valleys break the moon's crust in 2 directions, indicating a tectonic extension of Titania's crust. Deposits of a highly reflective material can be seen along the walls of these valleys that face the sun. Oberon is further away from Uranus at an average distance of 362,000 miles. It also takes longer to rotate in orbit at around 13.5 days. Its surface is pretty heavily cratered, especially compared to Titania, Ariel, and Miranda. Some of the many bright craters on the surface look like they've been flooded by darker material that upwelled from the moon's interior. Oberon has at least one large mountain that rises as much as 4 miles off the surface. Ariel and Umbriel were discovered on October 24th, 1851 by William Lassell. Ariel has a diameter of about 718 miles, while Umbriel is a bit bigger at 726 miles. They're named after characters from Alexander Pope's poem The Rape of the Lock, although Ariel also takes its name from a character in William Shakespeare's The Tempest. Ariel orbits about 118,620 miles from Uranus. Its orbital and rotation periods are both about 2.5 days long. In addition to the water ice and silicate rock that make up all the large moons, carbon dioxide has also been detected on Ariel. Its surface appears to be the youngest of all the moons of Uranus. There are very few large craters and many small ones. This indicates recent low-impact collisions have wiped out the larger craters that would have been left by bigger, older impacts. Ariel is thought to have had the most recent geologic activity of the larger moons, which could also contribute to the erasure of old craters. Grabens, which are valleys bounded by faults, cross the moon's surface. This surface is the brightest of the Uranian moons. When in opposition to the sun, which means an observer is directly between Ariel and the sun, its surface seems to increase in in brightness, which suggests a porous texture. Measurements have shown that Ariel's temperature falls and rises quickly as sunlight comes and goes. This is consistent with a porous surface, which tends to insulate the moon and prevent it from heating up. In an earlier time, Ariel seems to have undergone enough heating to allow for differentiation, which is a process by which heavier materials sink towards the core and lighter materials float near the surface. Tidal interactions with Uranus could have provided a significant source of heat for this process. Umbriel is further away than Ariel at 165,270 miles from Uranus. It orbits and rotates a little over every 4 days. It's unique from the other moons in that it lacks any evidence of past tectonic activity. It's also the darkest of the largest Uranian moons, as it reflects only 16% of the sunlight that reaches it. Exactly why its surface is so dark is a mystery. Images from Voyager revealed a curious feature of Umbriel. It has a bright ring about 90 miles across. Scientists aren't too sure what created this ring. It could be frost deposits associated with an impact crater. This ring has been named Wanda after a dark spirit in Australian Aboriginal mythology. Miranda was discovered in telescopic photos of the Uranian system by Gerard P. Kuiper on February 16, 1948 at the McDonald Observatory in western Texas. It was the last moon of Uranus to be discovered before Voyager 2's visit in 1986. It takes its name from a character in Shakespeare's The Tempest. Of the 5 Uranian moons known before the Voyager 2 visit, Miranda is the smallest and the closest to Uranus. Unlike the other 4 main satellites, its orbit is slightly inclined. The moon is about 310 miles in diameter, and it orbits about 80,600 miles from Uranus. It orbits and rotates once every 1.4 days. Miranda is likely composed of a higher proportion of water ice to rock than the other major moons. It seems unlikely to support much tectonic activity, but it features one of the strangest and most varied landscapes among terrestrial bodies. This includes 3 large features known as coronae, which are unique among bodies in the solar system. Coronae are lightly cratered collections of ridges and valleys, and they're separated from the more heavily cratered terrain by very sharp boundaries. Miranda also has fault canyons as much as 12 times as deep as the Grand Canyon on Earth. Because of the moon's low gravity and the size of the cliffs, a rock dropped from the edge of the highest cliff would take a full 10 minutes to reach the bottom. Scientists can't quite agree on what's responsible for Miranda's features. It could have been smashed apart and then haphazardly reassembled, giving it the strange patchwork appearance. Or the coronae could be the sites of large rocky or metallic meteorite strikes. These strikes could have partially melted the moon's icy subsurface, resulting in periods of slushy water rising to the surface before refreezing. Miranda's surface is almost as bright as Ariel's. Like Ariel, its brightness increases dramatically when in opposition, so it likely has a porous surface. This could be the result of eons of micrometeorites striking the soil. When Voyager 2 flew past Uranus and took some pictures, 10 more moons were discovered among these images. The rotation periods of all of these moons are unknown. We don't know how long it takes for them to spin once. Puck was the first one found in December of 1985. It has a diameter of about 90 miles. It orbits 53,400 miles from Uranus, completing one circle around the planet in a little over 3/4 of a day. The largest of the lesser-known Uranian satellites, it's named for a character from Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream. Juliet and Portia were discovered on January 3rd, 1986. Juliet has a diameter of about 60 miles, orbits 40,000 miles from Uranus, and completes an orbit in a little less than half a day. It takes its name from the titular character in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Portia is about 87 miles in diameter, orbits 41,000 miles from Uranus, and completes an orbit in a little over half a day. Its name comes from a character in Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice. Cressida was discovered on January 9th, 1986. It's about 50 miles in diameter, orbits 38,400 miles from Uranus, and completes one orbit in about 0.46 days. It's named after a titular character in Troilus and Cressida by Shakespeare. Desdemona, Rosalind, and Belinda were all discovered on January 13th, 1986. Desdemona is about 40 miles across, orbits 40,000 miles from Uranus, and completes one orbit every 0.47 days. Its name comes from a character in Shakespeare's Othello. Rosalind is about 44 miles across, orbits 43,400 miles from Uranus, and completes one orbit every 0.56 days. It's named after a character in Shakespeare's As You Like It. Belinda has a diameter of about 50 miles. It orbits 46,800 miles from Uranus Uranus and completes an orbit every 0.62 days. Its name comes from a character in Pope's The Rape of the Lock. Cordelia and Ophelia were discovered on January 20th, 1986. They're both about the same size at about 25 or 26 miles across. Cordelia orbits 31,000 miles from Uranus with an orbital period of 0.34 days. Ophelia orbits 33,400 miles away and takes 0.38 days to complete an orbit. Cordelia and Ophelia both act as shepherd moons for the Epsilon ring of Uranus. Both are named after Shakespeare characters, with Cordelia coming from King Lear and Ophelia from Hamlet. Bianca was the 10th moon discovered in the Voyager 2 images on January 23, 1986. It has a diameter of about 32 miles. It orbits 36,800 miles from Uranus and completes an orbit every 0.44 days. The moon is named after a character in Shakespeare's The Taming of the Shrew. Although Perdita was first captured in the Voyager 2 images, it wasn't noticed until 13 years later. In 1999, Eric Karkoschka found the moon in the public archive of the Voyager 2 images when he was comparing them to images from the Hubble Space Telescope. Following Karkoschka's discovery, the International Astronomical Union recognized Perdita as a moon of Uranus. However, when subsequent efforts failed to observe it, the IAU withdrew its designation. 4 years after Karkoschka first noticed the moon in 2003, its existence was finally confirmed when the Hubble Space Telescope imaged it right in its predicted location. Perdita has a diameter of about 19 miles, so it's pretty small. Lying at a distance of about 47,500 miles from Uranus, its orbit is between those of Belinda and Puck. It completes an orbit once every 0.64 days. Its name comes from a character in Shakespeare's play The Winter's Tale. The moons Cupid and Mab were discovered in August of 2003, with Mab found on the 23rd and Cupid found on the 25th. They were discovered by Mark R. Showalter and Jack J. Lissar using the Hubble Space Telescope. Both moons are about 6 miles in diameter. Cupid orbits 46,225 miles from Uranus every 0.61 days, while Mab orbits 60,730 miles away every 0.92 days. They're so small and dark that they even escaped Voyager 2's notice. Mab orbits at the same distance as Uranus's Mu ring. It might provide dust for the ring when it's struck by small meteoroids or ring particles. Cupid is named after the Roman god of love who appears in Shakespeare's Romeo and Juliet. Mab takes its name from the Queen of Fairies in English folklore, who is mentioned in Romeo and Juliet. The irregular satellites of Uranus are 9 small outer moons that are all roughly the same size as the Voyager finds. Their average distances from Uranus lie between 2.5 and 13 million miles away. They were likely captured into their orbits around the planet. Most have retrograde orbits, so they orbit in the direction opposite of Uranus's rotation. All take their names from characters in Shakespeare's The Tempest, except for Margaret, whose name instead comes from a character in Much Ado About Nothing. Caliban and Sycorax were discovered on September 6, 1997 by Philip D. Nicholson, Brett J. Gladman, Joseph A. Burns, and John J. Cavallars using the 200-inch Hale telescope at the Palomar Observatory. Caliban is about 44 miles in diameter. It orbits 4.5 million miles from Uranus and completes an orbit every 580 days. Sycorax is larger at 93 miles across, and it's also further away at a distance of 7.6 million miles. It orbits once every 1,288 days. Sycorax has similar orbital characteristics to the moons Setebos and Prospero, which suggests a common origin between the three. But its light red color is different from the gray of the other two moons, which makes it seem like Sycorax has a different origin. Stefano, Prospero, and Setebos were all discovered on July 18, 1999 by John J. Cavallars, Brett J. Gladman, Matthew Holman, Jean-Marc Petit, and Hans Scholl using the Canada-France-Hawaii telescope at the Mauna Kea Observatory. Stefano is about 20 miles across, orbits 5 million miles from Uranus, and completes an orbit once every 677 days. Its orbital characteristics are similar to those of Caliban, suggesting a common origin between the two. Prospero is about 31 miles across. It orbits 10.1 million miles from Uranus with an orbital period of 1,978 days. Setebos is about 30 miles across, orbits about 10.8 million miles from Uranus, and completes an orbit every 2,225 days. Francisco, Trinculo, and Ferdinand were discovered on August 13, 2001 by John J. Cavallars, Matthew J. Holman, Dan Milis-Savljevic, and Tommy Grav at the Cerro Tololo Inter-American Observatory. Francisco has a diameter of about 14 miles. Orbiting 2.65 million miles from Uranus, it's the innermost of the planet's irregular moons. It completes an orbit every 267 days. Trinculo's diameter is about 11 miles. It orbits 5.3 8.3 million miles from Uranus and completes an orbit every 750 days. Ferdinand has a diameter of about 12 miles. It orbits Uranus at a greater known distance than any other known satellite of the planet at 13 million miles away. It completes a single orbit every 2,887 days, which is almost 8 entire years. Margaret was discovered on August 29, 2003 by Scott S. Shepard and David C. Jewett with the Subaru 8.2-meter reflector at the Mauna Kea Observatory. It's about 12 miles across, orbits 8.9 million miles from Uranus, and completes an orbit every 1,687 days. Strangely, it's the only irregular satellite with a prograde orbit. Maybe that's why it's also the only one that doesn't have a name from The Tempest. On February 23, 2024, a new moon was announced around Uranus, the first one in over 2 decades. It was announced alongside 2 new moons for Neptune. Currently, it's been given the provisional designation S/2023 U1. At only about 5 miles across, this one is probably the smallest of Uranus's known moons. It has an orbit of about 680 days. Scott S. Shepard first spotted this moon on November 4th, 2023, using the Magellan telescopes at the Las Campanas Observatory in Chile. Follow-up observations in December solidified its orbit, and this also helped to identify previously unrecognized observations of the moon from 2021 that were made with the Magellan and the Subaru telescope in Hawaii. The moon's orbit falls between those of Caliban and Stefano. The similarities in these 3 moons' orbits gave rise to the theory that they may have all been part of a larger moon that broke apart from a collision. For now, the moon has no official name, but it will eventually receive one that follows the tradition of naming the moons of Uranus after literary characters. And that's it. Those are all the moons of Uranus. The ones that we know of, at least. There could be more. In fact, there probably are more. There are anomalies in the rings of Uranus that suggest the existence of even more moons that we just haven't seen yet. I actually had fun researching this and putting all the information about these moons together, especially when compared to the agony I endured with Saturn's moons. Thanks, Uranus, for having a much smaller number of moons. But anyway, yeah, that's it for the Uranian moons. We don't really know a whole lot about most of them because we haven't had an opportunity to study them up close. Maybe that'll change in the future, though. The next solar system spotlight video will focus on Neptune, and then the one after that will be about Neptune's moons, and that one should be even easier because Neptune has even fewer moons than Uranus. Thanks for watching, like and subscribe if you enjoyed, and have a good day.